federal judge overseeing a civil case involving the Capitol riot found that Donald Trump and his attorney, John Eastman, quote, more likely than not, to have corruptly attempted to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January the 6th. This is a humongous deal because it would make the effort by Trump and Eastman to overturn the election on that day potentially a real crime, a full crime. And that, as the federal judge also noted, could have permanently ended the peaceful transfer of power that is a bedrock of our American democracy. The judge directed Eastman to turn over more than 100 documents to the January 6th committee, including an email chain containing a draft memo written for then-President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani. The memo, according to the judge, recommended that then-Vice President Pence reject electors from disputed states. And joining me now to break this all down, former U.S. Attorney and NBC News legal analyst Joyce Vance. So this quote from this judge is not from a criminal case. We have to be clear about that. So that being said, what does this mean for Donald Trump and any potential criminal case in the future?
So it really means nothing for a future criminal case against the president because, as you're smart to point out, Zerlina, in a criminal case, the government would have to prove the allegations of crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. But leaving that sort of obvious qualification aside, in many ways, this is a bombshell because this is a sitting federal judge who's been on the bench for almost 25 years, someone who's known for being rigorous and analytical, someone who teaches other judges. And he takes a look at the pleadings in this case, and he concludes that it's likely, more likely than not, that the former president committed crimes while he was president. And not just any crimes, not just some sort of low-hanging fruit kind of crime. He was actively involved in trying to interfere with the transfer of power. So I think we've all lived with this situation for so long that it loses some of the shock value that it really should, because when you sit back and think about it, this is tremendously, tremendously shocking. It's something that should never happen with our country. But with President Trump, this was almost an everyday occurrence, his efforts to interfere with the normal functioning of democracy. And that perhaps is how we get ourselves to this point where a federal judge says, yes, I've looked at the evidence, and although this is a civil context, and I only have to decide it's more likely than not that the former president committed crimes, I believe that's what he did based on the evidence.
So what you said there is really important context that I had not had earlier, which is that this is a judge who teaches other judges. Speak to how important, you called it a bombshell. So speak to how significant it is that this specific judge, who teaches all the other judges how to be judges and to be good judges and fair and impartial judges, comes to a conclusion that the president committed this crime. Because it's not as if we're talking in the context of the New York criminal case or, you know, Attorney Bragg, who decided not to charge in the financial cases related to Donald Trump. This is a crime, as you said, which goes to the heart of our democracy, a conspiracy at the heart of our democratic process. Why is that different?
Yeah, so I want to be really careful to talk about this in terms that make sense in the context of our legal system. This is a federal district judge, a trial judge. His rulings can, of course, be reviewed on appeal by appellate courts, and they can make different findings. But what struck me as very unusual about this 40-some-odd page opinion is that the judge is actually forced to explore the issue of criminality. He's not just sort of on a frolic and detour here. He's being asked whether he can force John Eastman, one of the president's lawyers, to turn over documents to the January 6th committee. And it turns out that for a number of these documents, what it comes down to, the pivotal issue, is whether this was legitimate work product made by an attorney in anticipation of litigation, or whether this series of emails was covered by something called the crime fraud exception, which says that if you're a client and you go to seek advice from a lawyer in order to make it easier for you to commit crimes, or you're seeking some advice to help you commit crimes, whether the lawyer knows it or not, whether you commit those crimes or not, that those documents aren't privileged and that they can be turned over in litigation. And so the judge had to make this finding about the crime fraud exception to decide whether or not the January 6th committee could have this tranche of John Eastman's emails. The fact that the judge makes that finding and lays out significant evidence, this isn't a short conclusion. He lays out piece after piece of evidence that the former president held a series of meetings, including somewhere where he personally tried to pressure Mike Pence, that the pressure campaign went on through January 6th, where the former president tweeted about Pence and saying that Pence controlled the outcome of the election, that Trump and Eastman worked together to create a plan. The judge goes really point by point through the analysis before he concludes that it's more likely than not that they committed at least two crimes. One is obstruction of the congressional effort to count the electoral vote. The other is a conspiracy to interfere with the United States operations. And so this is a detailed, rich opinion.
The way that I remember the crime fraud exception, this is true, is the Breaking Bad rule. When Jesse says, you don't need a criminal lawyer, you need a criminal lawyer. Meaning, like, you need a lawyer that's willing to commit crimes with you and help you commit crimes. So switching gears to some of the other folks that have been named in this larger story, the House Select Committee is meeting tonight to consider criminal contempt charges for former Trump aides Peter Navarro and Dan Scavino. Dan Scavino, the one who ran all the social media. Do you have any predictions for how this will turn out? I mean, will these folks be used to perhaps get evidence to get closer to Donald Trump?
The real question here is whether the committee is going to be able to enforce these subpoenas. We know that the Mark Meadows subpoena, Trump's former chief of staff, who the committee issued to a subpoena 2 months ago, DOJ hasn't yet weighed in on whether they'll enforce that subpoena or not with contempt proceedings. And Congress really isn't in the driver's seat here. They have to defer to DOJ and ask DOJ to enforce these subpoenas. Without an earlier ruling in the Meadows case, it's tough to know what the outcome would be with these two folks who have been subpoenaed and declined to testify. But ultimately, if Congress can't push ahead and find a way to enforce its subpoenas, then the entire process falls apart.
Well, this ongoing saga is very much still ongoing. Joyce Vance, thank you so much for helping us understand the latest. Please stay safe.
Hi, I'm Zerlina Maxwell. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more from Zerlina by clicking any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thanks for watching.